I put in the chat a link to the slides if you want them. It also has citations, so it's 70 pages, so more than just the slides I will cover tonight. There's also a link here to models. We'll be going there in a little bit. So, but let me start here by giving you some framework for how we need to think about AI and the changes that it's bringing to higher education and, frankly, to human existence. The first is obvious that AI is already changing work, that companies want to hire people who have AI expertise, and that all of us have tasks that AI will help us do. I think more important, though, for us as educators is that AI is going to change thinking, and we need to pay attention to this because how it changes thinking, how it changes the role of expertise is going to be important for our jobs, but also for our students' future jobs. So think about a map. If I give you a map, which is a type of cognitive technology, it improves the way you think. If I take the map away, you're still able to think about the world in new ways because I showed you the map. It made you smarter in a way. But if I give you GPS and then I take the GPS away, you're just lost. So the GPS, you cognitively offload to the GPS and you end up not being smarter. In the same way that if with a phone, I no longer remember phone numbers because they're all in my phone. An abacus makes you smarter, a calculator does not. The metaphor that I think is actually most useful is that of a manual transmission versus an automatic transmission in a car. I'm old enough to remember the days when using an automatic transmission was something of a moral failure, that it was forbidden. You should not do this. You should not let a machine take these choices away from you as a human. You will not be fully driving the car. You should use a clutch. And of course, nowadays, most of us use an automatic transmission. And yes, we are letting a machine, an artificial intelligence, if you like, make choices about our driving in the car, but we're still steering. And so the point of that is that we don't actually know if AI is going to be more like a map or more like GPS, that there is clearly going to be cognitive offloading, but will it make us smarter or not? Second, AI is going to change average. It's going to change the baseline of what's acceptable student work. Students who can only do AI level work, whatever you think that is, however good or bad you think AI currently is, and it will only get better, but whatever that level is, that's the baseline. If you as a student, you graduate and all you can do is the same work that AI can do, you will no longer have value in the workplace. That work has been devalued. AI is also going to make us more creative in some interesting and weird ways, and that might be a good thing if you're working on a creative project and want to get unstuck. But it can also mean that we might, as a species, not be able to be as creative on our own. And so, again, we are the people who need to be vigilant about this. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I want to just give you a couple of examples to help us think about the way that AI is changing work and thinking. So we now have a number of studies that show that AI can do legal work, that it actually can make lawyers better, but it can also replace junior lawyers. So the good news is that senior lawyers are still experts, and that has value. They're better than AI. But the junior lawyers and interns are not, which means if you're a lawyer, it makes sense to buy this product called co-counsel so that you can do more of what AI can't, right? You can let AI do work. So for example, if I have an intern, I'm going to see a judge on Thursday. I want to know all the case precedent. I have them do some research for me. But now, of course, I can have a model. I can have deep research done, right? I could say, I want you to look at every single case the judge has ever looked at on every day of the week with every type of defendant, sort them into categories, do me a report. I can do much more than my interns could do. So that makes sense because I'm the expert and I can then judge whether the results are good. There is, of course, by the way, a problem in the US at least, where judges are getting annoyed at people turning in AI work, which has hallucinated citations. Well, that's not the AI's fault. That's the part of the human who didn't check them. But the other problem here is that the way that you become an expert is by practicing and making mistakes and you become a senior lawyer by first being a junior lawyer. So what we're seeing is that junior lawyer jobs are going away. In fact, entry-level jobs are going away in lots of industries. So that's going to affect the pipeline. How will people become senior experts if they can't first make these mistakes? And I believe that this is something that industry is going to ask us to fix. My corporate clients are telling me already, yes, we're not going to hire all those people, but you should set up internships at your university to make sure that they have the kind of expertise that we need in order to hire them. Because again, the bar has been raised. Another example is financial analysis. So in this case, the Fortune 500 companies, the quarterly reports were fed to the AI and said, what do you think will be the next quarter's earnings? And the AI was better than humans. And they thought, well, perhaps the AI is cheating. It's looking at the records. And so they said, let's make it so the AI can't cheat, give it next quarter. And of course, the AI is not cheating because an AI doesn't know anything. It's predicting based upon its model and the weights of what it's learned, but it doesn't actually have information that it's checking, which is why it hallucinates. And I'll come back to that. But the reason was, why does the AI do better than human analysts? And the reason is that while AI has a bias, it has a bias because it learned from humans, but humans also have bias. And so if I say to you, how do you think Tesla will do next quarter? Who do you think of, right? You all think of Elon Musk, and now you have a bias, right? One way or the other, your emotions, or if you own Tesla stock or you have a Tesla, you now have a bias because your emotions are at play because you're human. That's understandable. So with a human bias, if I say to you, I would like you to rank the candidates for the position in history based only upon their teaching and research, and I'd like you to ignore the prestige of where they got their PhD. Can you do that? You can, but it's difficult for a human. If I said, I'd like you to grade these student essays, and I'd like you to mark them, the ones who disagree with you should get higher marks. That's possible as a human, but your bias interferes because you don't like people who disagree with you as much, and so you have to work at that. But AI bias is easier to fix, and this is really important. AI has bias, but it's easier to fix because you just tell it to rank the candidates based on teaching, and that's it. It'll do that. It won't look at the prestige of where they got their PhD. They're not like humans. So that's why HR departments have been the first to adopt AI, because its bias is easier to correct. I can look at all of the quarterly performance reports and tell me whether the women do better here or whether this manager is fair. I can do all sorts of things because I can tell the AI exactly what I want. So if you're aware of AI bias, it can be more easily altered than a human bias, which is useful. And it's why it gives us better financial predictions. So now I've put in the chat a list of models. This is my eye chart. Everyone's heard of ChatGPT, and you've probably all heard of Gemini and Claude. But then there's some other models. You've probably all heard of DeepSeek by now, but there are other models. And so what I've done is I keep a website, and I keep this current so that you can come back here. But the idea is that the way I would get started with AI is I go to my website, which you can see here, and you can see that there's a link there for prompts. There's also a link there to the slides. That's the other link that I gave you. And so I've just divided this up, right? So here are the big three that you should know: Claude, ChatGPT, which is also Copilot, and Gemini. There are links that open up in tabs, but then there are other models, right? So we have now Grok 3, like Claude 3.7, we think is a third generation model. Sonus is a new family. You've probably not heard of that if you're new to this. The advantage of a new model, though, is that they often make it free. So if you've not tried a reasoning model yet, for example, you can try this with DeepSeek or with Sonus for free. You still have to pay, I think, although ChatGPT now allows you to use one of their thinking models, you have to click the thinking button. In fact, I will do that for you. So if I click on the thing, it opens up in ChatGPT, and you'll notice now that I have a couple of buttons, right? So I have to hit search and I have to hit reasoning. Now, reasoning will do different things than just the chat will. It will take longer to respond. It takes more energy, but it can handle more complicated things. So if you just, so if you want to know something like, I want you to analyze the websites of all of my competitors, I want you to build me an online course in a website. I want you to use best practices. And first, I want you to compile a report of all of the best models of online courses in my field. Then you would click the search button and the reasoning button, and you wouldn't get just what the model believes you want to hear, you'd get actual research. So I've listed some models here. They do different things, right? Grok has a feed, the immediate feed to X. So if you want to know what are people saying about me in the last hour, that's the best model to use. If you want to do math, Wolfram Alpha does better math than many of the other models, although that's changed in the last couple of weeks. We have models, the Chinese models, Quen is very good at math, etc. And then I have a category of open source models. And here you can see a number of new Kimi, Quen, the new models, Mistral, etc. But I also include a couple of regional models. So this is interesting, right? Because on the one hand, right, so the big models are trained on the internet, which is mostly English language, at least the American models are, and a broad swath of the internet. But these are models that have been trained on specific regional data sets. So Mistral, for example, is trained on all of the languages in India, but also the Arabic dialects. So it has a different knowledge base that it learned from. And so in theory, it thinks differently. So I do, okay, so what I would do is I would try some of these models, and here are the reasoning models. So you click on some models, you open up some tabs. And then what I do is I go back here and I would click on the prompts, because people misunderstand AI for two reasons. One is they're using the wrong tool, right? If you need a hammer, don't use a screwdriver. You'll misunderstand what the hammer can do. But the other is people give prompts that are less than useful. So what I've done here is given you a list of easy prompts to try, because the thinking about the prompting and what AI can do is actually useful. Don't ask the AI who won the last World Cup, right? You can Google that. AI may or may not give you the right answer. That's when AI is prone to hallucinate. But if I want this first prompt, innovative ideas for how to introduce college students to topic whatever, this is a pretty good prompt. AI can do this task. So my suggestion is that you copy this prompt, and I'm going to do that here, and I am going to put this into Claude. Now, I have asked Claude to introduce students at my institution to a subject that I know, right? So you have to replace the X and Y, because I can evaluate whether or not it's given me good responses to Western music history, right? Non-majors, examples they will find relevant. The more that you tell them about your students, the more context, how old they are, where they are, you're in Singapore, et cetera, the better the answers will be, the more specific they will be. So I can do this in Claude. I get 20 answers. They're fine. And then I'm going to do this in Latimer. Now, Latimer is a different model. It's been trained on black and brown sources that are licensed and verified, by the way. But I'm going to ask it exactly the same question, because what I want to see is it gives me different types of responses. So Claude and ChatGPT don't give a response like this. In this case, again, I teach music. Compare Beethoven's revolutionary spirit to artists like Beyonce or Kendrick Lamar. Right? It's given me a culturally relevant response because of the way it was trained. But notice that I can do the same thing by going back to Claude and just giving it a persona. I can tell it, well, I want you to respond as if you were teaching Black students at an HBCU. That's a historically Black college and university in the US, right? You would do the same thing. I'm teaching Chinese students. I have Malaysian students. Right, whatever. Tell me the type of students. Use cultural references. They're older students. They're online. The more cultural information you give, the better. And so when I do this, Claude radically changes its answer, right? It gives me answers that relate to the kinds of things that I have asked it. So that idea of cultural context is important. So that's just the introduction. Again, many of you I know have used a lot more AI than that. But my suggestion for those of you who have only used ChatGPT is that, again, you start with my website, you start with the models, you try some different models, and then you try some different prompts, but try the same prompt in different AI to get a sense of what it can do. And then let's try one more thing. What I'd like you to do now is I would like you to try to make your answer better. So start with this. Start by asking an AI a question. Write me 150 words about, and then ask it to write about something that you know about. Right? So ask it to write 150 words about something that you know about. I'd like to know 150 words about the Krebs cycle, about thermodynamics, about your dissertation topic, about things my students are interested in as it relates to my course. Ask it to write something that you can then judge, and I'll give you a minute to try that. All right. I will notice, right, I don't speak any Asian languages, but I know that in Spanish, when I'm using ChatGPT, it's not as good in Spanish. It's better in English. If I ask it exactly the same question in Spanish, it's not as good. Hence, there's a new Spanish AI coming. Again, not just that it's not culturally relevant, it's just it's not as smart. All right. So then what I'd like you to do is in the chat, grade the response. How did it do? What kind of mark would you give it? How good was the response? Was it a passing mark, A, B, C, D? If you do British marking, whatever. Just give me a sense of how well you thought the AI did. Good. So now what I'd like you to do is I would like you to see if you can make the answer better by asking a follow-up. So think of these follow-ups. First of all, if I asked it to write 150 words about thermodynamics, I didn't tell it it was an expert in physics. So try saying, now respond as an expert in physics, as a professor with 30 years of experience, as someone who is kind and caring, but also very knowledgeable of the subject. You could give it a style of writing, write as if you were X. You were writing in this magazine, write for students of this age. But you could also just try to say, slow down and think more carefully. Is there something you might have missed that could make your answer better? The point is that you have to ask a follow-up to make it better. So try a follow-up and tell me then in the chat, did you make your answer better? And there are some strange things that work because AI is a weird technology, right? If you threaten it or you offer to give it Taylor Swift tickets or chocolate, does that improve your answer? Saying please and thank you. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Or just try slow down and think more carefully. See if any of those improve the quality. Context, I think, is the most important, right? Telling it it's an expert. Great. So people talk about this as prompt engineering, but I'm not so sure engineering is the right metaphor, right? Because prompting is weird. It's much weirder than engineering, right? It's not the same thing doesn't always work, but iteration tends to work. But you have to start with what you know, right? You have to be an expert to be able to evaluate the answer. Notice in my initial prompt, I used the word innovative. I said, give me 10 innovative ideas. What happens if I take the word innovative out? I get more boring ideas because it's a language model. In some ways, you can think of it as a literal language model. It's very literal. So small changes make a difference. So in other words, using AI well is really about these two things, asking better questions, evaluating answers. That should sound familiar, right? This is what we do for a living as teachers in higher ed, right? This is the faculty job. In other words, all of us are teaching AI literacy, whether we knew it or not, because using AI well, yes, it does involve, do I know some tools? Do I have some ideas about some prompts? Sure. But it's thinking, am I really asking the right question? Could I ask it a better question? And then, oh, it didn't give me a good answer. How do I make that answer better? That critical thinking process is something that we already do. And I think that's going to become even more important. We're calling this the 70% problem because in coding, it turns out that if I know nothing about computer code, I can now get a C. I can now get a soft pass because I can now get the AI to write my code for me because I'm a novice. I can get part of the way. I can get a working prototype, but I'm not able to evaluate the results and make it better. So it turns out that novices can only get to 70% of the solution. But an expert can use AI to accelerate what they already know and do better work. That's interesting, but it also means that the problem for higher education changes. And that now our job is how do we create experts? I'm not going to show you all these tools, but in addition to the frontier models, if you scroll down on my page, you will see many more tools that do lots of interesting things. All of the tools, most of the tools on the page use ChatGPT. Notebook LM uses Gemini. But the point is that these tools often do something else that's related, but they're using the underlying model, but the interface is a little different. So I'm going to show you just one of them. But again, I suggest that you go to Consensus, which is an AI API, which stands for Application Program Interface. So it talks to ChatGPT. But when you ask it a question, it only searches the Semantic Scholar database, which is all 250 million published papers. It has, you could do that with ChatGPT, you just have to tell it to do that. But in this case, it's already set up for you. And so that can often be easier. But the tool that I think is interesting that you probably have heard of, but if not, this is called Notebook LM. And so what it does is it allows me to upload my own documents and then interact with them. So I could ask for a study guide, etc. In this case, I uploaded one of my previous books, and then I can ask it to give me a podcast summary of my book. And so here are these two
Welcome
people.
to another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling Educating for Uncertainty by
And
James
notice
A.
I can
Oh, hey,
interrupt.
our listener wants to join in.
Yes, can
What's
you
up?
give me the most important idea in the book in one sentence, please?
Absolutely, I can do that for you.
Okay, in a nutshell.
Bowen argues that the core goal of education should be teaching students how to think independently and adapt to change, rather than
So
just
notice
think.
two
Nailed
things.
it.
One is that it produced this 10-minute podcast from what I uploaded. But second, I was able to interrogate it, right? I can interrupt it and ask a question, and it responds to my questions. So I have a tutor, right? So here, again, this is Notebook LM. There's the manuscript I uploaded. I can now chat with it. I can ask questions. I can also ask for a briefing document or study notes. But of course, what students are doing is taking all of the reading and they can upload a week's worth of reading and say, give me a podcast. But what's more important is not just a podcast. I can say, they give me a podcast that I can talk that will tutor me, which is essentially, it does it automatically. It just gives me, I can now say, oh, I don't understand that, explain that. There are a number of sites like this. There's something called Explain Paper, which does exactly what it says. You upload a PDF and you say, highlight the sentence. What does that mean? Explain this to me in non-technical language, translate this. There's another program called Illuminate that also here's the link to the article, give me a podcast summary, allow me to interrogate it, right? So there are a number of these tools which have great potential to help us learn, but they also, of course, offer this potential for students to cheat, right? Anyway, so you should explore some of those. Napkin AI does infographics. So this is actually a slide that was made by Napkin. These are also APIs that do graphics. They do various kinds of analyses. There are hundreds of these, thousands of these. And I mention them because it's like the difference between using Google or a browser on the internet and using an app on your phone. If I want to know how many flights were delayed today in the world, I go to Google or my browser and I type in the question. If I want to know, is my flight on time and how far am I from the airport? I go to an app. And the app tells me you're 20 minutes from the airport, leave now, your flight is delayed. It also uses the internet, but it has an interface that's customized in a way that's useful. So you don't have to know every app, and you don't need every app on your phone, but you need to know that there are things called apps, in this case, APIs, which sometimes can give you a specialized tool like infographics that can be useful. So those are the two types of things we're dealing with. And again, I keep a list of those on the website. Are there questions about the difference between frontier models or the actual brains and the APIs or the tools that I just showed you? Great. Okay. Well, I will look at the chat if you think of a question. So AI is also going to change communication and relationships. One Stanford researcher says it's like a Grammarly for empathy, right? So what this means is that AI is more persuasive. Again, so AI doesn't get emotional, which means it will listen better and more thoroughly and for longer. But AI is also becoming better at emotional situations and reading emotions, et cetera. So this is actually pretty old technology. This is from almost a year ago. But remember I said AI was going to change average? So again, here's a demo. He has a job interview and he asks the AI. So you can do this on your phone. You can do this. This is the ChatGPT app he's using. But you can also go to ChatGPT on your computer. You hit the microphone. You could also do this with HUME or Sesame AI. They all have conversational AIs that are all actually more emotionally attuned than this. But we now have AIs that listen to your emotion, that can determine how you're feeling and also respond emotionally. So let's listen to this.
I just need to know, do I look presentable, professional?
Well, Rocky, you definitely have the I've been coding all night look down, which could actually work in your favor. Maybe just run a hand through your hair or lean into the mad genius vibe. Your enthusiasm is what's really going to shine through.
I don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to throw this on. What do you think?
Oh, Rocky, that's quite a statement piece. I mean, you'll definitely stand out. Though maybe not in the way you're hoping for an interview.
Okay, I got it.
So my point here is not that this is right, the most amazing emotional intelligence, but it is better than average, right? You do faculty who were not this emotionally intelligent. So again, I have a list of these on my website, but you could try Hume or Sesame, have a conversation. I do predict that the birth rate will go down because these new bots are more emotionally attuned. They're able to meet people's needs. Yeah, I don't like it. I'm just telling you what I think will happen. But what this also means is that we can use AI to expand perspective. So I have a syllabus, I have an assignment. I want to know, are there parts of this that might be unclear to a student, be insensitive? Does this, could I make this appear more caring, etc.? This is already happening in the workplace where my daughter says when she writes to her Gen Z employee, she has put emojis, make sure I'm giving a compliment and I'm being caring. And then when she's writing to her boss, she says, I'm writing to my boomer boss, just reduce this email to bullet points. And she changes the style of writing quite quickly. But it also means that I can figure out, well, what would somebody from a different religious background, a different cultural background, the other political party, what might they say about this essay? So if a student has written an essay, I can now say, well, I want to get a different perspective on it. But it also means that I can do focus groups. So marketing, right, is probably the major that I would not recommend anybody do right now because marketing is being transformed because you don't need to do focus groups anymore, right? You can do an AI focus group very quickly. And notice my prompt, right? I'm trying to gain a richer understanding of the problem, right? Help me respond as a trusting and honest question my assumptions, tell me stories, build my empathy. Notice that's a prompt. That's not code. It is code for a language model, but it was written from a humanities person who's creative, who thinks about, well, how do I get the answer that I want? And so this is on my website, but I suggest that, again, you try this prompt and that you try it in an area where you know the answer, right? Your family, a business that you know about, and see if in fact it responds in a typical way that you could say, oh, I want my students to interview somebody from this political party, somebody who's incarcerated, somebody from another country. And could it in fact give you that perspective that a student couldn't get, but also can get quickly? So I use this in design thinking. I use it in entrepreneurship. Does your product, right? You're designing a new product. Do your customers want this product? Get some feedback from them. It also, of course, works historically, right? Someone has done this with ancient Romans, with early modern Japanese texts, right? So you can give it a body of knowledge and say, now respond like an ancient Roman, right? Because it's been, these are historical language models. So they've been trained on other sorts of texts, not unlike the cultural ones I mentioned earlier. So what we know is that jobs are going to change because every job has a task that AI can already do better today. So, for example, when I go to my doctor, I used to go to the doctor, and in America, the doctor comes in and brings in a computer and starts typing because it's in medical insurance codes. But now the AI can do the medical insurance codes. And so when I go to the doctor, I get eye contact. He looks at me, he talks at me, and he says he no longer does the insurance. The AI does the insurance part. And so he saves 2 to 3 hours a day, right, in paperwork. So the question for you, is there paperwork? Like when I meet a student and I'm supposed to be building a mentorship or relationship with them, I mostly want to take this course. Do they get the prerequisites right? Do they right? I do administrative stuff. And what I really want to do is do this. So could AI help me with some of the admin so that I could spend more time on relationships? So I think by now I've convinced you, hopefully, that AI is changing average, right? It can do what average humans can do, but not what the best experts can do. And so we need to train students to be experts. There's one other wrinkle, though, which is that AI is also better able to customize its scale than humans can, right? So think about a birthday song or a bedtime story, right? So if you have a bedtime story for your child, right, it's generic. It may be a very good bedtime story, but it doesn't star your child necessarily, right? So now, tonight, try ChatGPT or try Hume and say, I'd like you to tell a 4-minute story about my child with my child as the hero. Give them the name, some context, and you will get a personalized bedtime story in whatever accent and level of drama that you like with your child or grandchild as the hero. So it may not be the best story, but it will be personalized and customized. And so that's a new feature that humans aren't going to be able to compete with. So if I'm writing generic bedtime stories, my stories now have to be better than the customized one that an AI would create. So so generic has an even harder time. I think greeting cards and those sorts of birthday songs, right? If you haven't tried Suno or Udio or Refusion, ask it to do a birthday song for someone that you love and give them some context, and right, you'll get a personalized song about your class, a friend, whatever. It may not be great, but it's average and it's customized. So in my view, so this is in American grades, the C grade, whatever the pass mark is, but AI is getting better all the time, but it's changing average. So I think we need to change our grading and our rubrics so that our students are having to do better, which means we have to raise standards, right? We have to raise standards, right? So what do? Well, students are cheating. And so there's proctoring, there's oral exams, there's blue books, there's these sorts of things. There are problems with all of these, especially online. If you you should Google your browser, so Safari, Chrome, etc., And then your LMS, Canvas, Blackboard, whatever, if you give tests online or do homework online, whatever system you use, Google AI extension, your browser and your tool, and you will get a list of tools that will live inside the browser, which will do the homework, right? There are also agents now like Operator from OpenAI, which will do things like you could ask it to, I would like you to type a paper in Google Docs at human speed. And it will take 3 hours to type a paper, and it will make mistakes and go back and do things. And so you'll end up with a document that looks like it was typed by a human. And remember all the tricks that I just taught you to iterate to make it better? All of those make it harder for an AI detector. So I don't think AI detectors are going to work. There's some nuance here that we don't have time to talk about. But there's a battle because it's a business. So students can pay for a humanizer that will beat your detector. They can use an agent to get around, right? So there are lots of ways to get around this. You should definitely, though, if you teach online at all or give online homework, definitely look for browser extensions that are AI answer machines. There are a lot of them. And at this point, there's nothing you can do. They're not detectable if you're teaching online. But there's another strategy, luckily, which is that what we call cheating, business calls progress, right? Which is how, in fact, are students going to be using AI in the same way that spell checkers didn't make me a better speller, but they make my spelling better. So I no longer grade spelling. I just expect that students will use a spell checker. And the same is true at work. So Grammarly, for example, uses ChatGPT. It's an API. So Grammarly will make your grammar better. And you could say, well, Grammarly is cheating. Of course, many of them have used Grammarly before they got to. But 1 in 3 Fortune 500 companies in the US are requiring Grammarly. They're requiring it, just like they require a spell checker. So what can we do? So recent graduates are struggling because they didn't learn enough AI, and they're telling us this. This is American data. So one thing you can do is you can articulate to students, what is that extra, right? I've raised my standards. What is it that you now have to do? And so my rubrics have been changed. So the things I used to give a pass mark to, I now say that's an AI. That's no longer a passing grade, right? You have to be able to do better than that. This is not always easy, though, because I have to articulate that it really can be better. So, for example, this image is, of course, an AI image. It's not a real human. So I'd have to tell you, well, okay, if you gave me this as an image I should use in my advertising campaign, how do I know it's an AI and why? I don't think I have an answer for that. I said I'd have to accept that, right? But so that's the first thing you could do. The other, though, especially for writing, is I can articulate for students the value of the process. This is not always easy, but here's what I do. This is called DEAR, define, evaluate, explore, and reflect. So I ask my students, I say, so we have to write a 3-page paper. What are the stages of that project? We have to write a lab report or a business proposal. I say, what are the stages? Remember, because I want them to be experts. And they say, well, I've got to edit, I've got to draft. Great. They rarely say they have to think, but that's clearly an important stage. And I say, so let's try this. First, I'd like you to just write your opening paragraph, write your thesis statement. Now, go. And they do that. And then I say, no, I want you to talk to an AI and see if you can use an AI to get better ideas. Use it for the idea piece. Ooh, okay, idea. And then I say, now write a thesis statement based upon a better idea. And then I say, now I want you to write the whole first paragraph. And now I want you to get feedback. And I give them the prompts like I showed you before. So what would somebody from the opposing political party think? What would somebody from a different background think, right? How could I make this argument stronger? And I have them get feedback. And I say, now use the AI feedback to make your argument better. And then the fourth thing I have them do is say, just ask the AI to write a paragraph for you. And then I have them, so we've explored the various sorts of things and we evaluate. Now I say, so now, which was the best paragraph? They mostly say the one written by AI. And I say, that's fine. I say, but which process helped you learn the most? And what did you learn when you asked AI to do the work for you? Well, you didn't learn much. And I said, could you evaluate the quality of that if you hadn't done the work yourself? No. So when the calculator came in, it didn't stop us having to teach addition, but it did change the way that we motivate students to learn addition. We have to talk them through why you still need to have addition. But the calculator also changed that we didn't have to teach long division the way that we do, or the way that we did, because the calculator and the spreadsheet can do that. So the challenge for most of us is pedagogical. When do I introduce AI? Certainly by the time they're about to graduate in their capstone seminar, right? Maybe not when they first start, but at some point, they're not going to become an accountant if they can't use a spreadsheet. So I have to introduce AI at some point, like I have to introduce the calculator at some point, but where and making sure students understand how and why. Another kind of writing assignment is the process assignment, where I say, have the AI do the assignment. Have it do the work for you. Great. Now copy that into a document and now make your code or your writing better, right? So take the code it's been given and now make it better. And every time you make it better, tell me in the comments why that's better, right? Is it more secure? Is it more elegant? Is it simple? And we talk about what makes it better, because that is the work that has value, making the AI better. Another type of assignment is the reverse outline. So I have them bring a project or a lab report, and then I say, so now I want you to ask the AI for a reverse outline, which is have the AI tell me, what did you think you said? What you think you said, what did you actually say? Then the AI will produce an outline, a one-sentence outline of each paragraph. And now I give them some prompts. Try this. Could you be more persuasive? Could you be more focused? And then make it better. Use that AI feedback to go make it better. This from someone at UVA, her assignment is Persuasion Impossible. Again, it's about raising standards. Choose a task that feels impossible, a persuasive task, and convincing somebody who voted for that person to vote for whatever, something. And now use an AI to allow you to be more persuasive than you could be on your own. Right? So these are all ways to raise the bar, to change our assignments. Lastly, AI is going to change creativity for two strange reasons. One, AI hallucinates. It makes stuff up. What do we call a human who makes up stuff and hallucinates? An artist, right? Somebody who's creative. So AI will put things together in unusual ways. Sometimes that's a hallucination. That's a bug if you're looking for data. But if you're looking for ideas, it's a feature. It's like collaborating with an alien. The other thing about AI is that it's socially uninhibited. It'll say whatever comes to its mind. And also, AI has no problem with quantity, right? It'll give you as many ideas as you want. So when you're stuck, and I need another idea for this experiment, I need another idea to try, AI is a great way to get unstuck. So for marketing, I ask, in this case, this is an American store. I say, I want new products. It gives me some new products. I say, great, I got 500 ideas for new products. Now I want you to iterate. I want you to pick 3. I want you to, what's the viability? What are they going to cost? What's the shelf life? Do customers want that product? There's still an assignment here, but I can use the AI to produce more ideas to help me get going. And so, of course, AI can help us improve our teaching, right? Because AI can generate. So these are things that AI is good at. It's not, notice finding data is not always on here. Now doing deep research, identifying controversies, right? If you use the deep thinking or the research button, you can obviously often get search data that's verified, but you have to ask it to verify it because it does hallucinate. But for generating examples, exploring possibilities, stimulating reflection, AI is a great tool, right? So for course design, how do I brainstorm new ideas for things to do in class, transform my syllabus? How long will this take? All sorts of things like that. If I want to design a new activity, I have a 40-minute class. Here's the topic. I want a 10-minute activity. Here's how the students are seated. So this is a template that has the various things that you would want to ask, but AI is a great idea suggester and designer of activities. It'll even design the materials, right? List the materials I need, produce them in nicely formatted. But AI can mostly, I think, interestingly, help us with reflection, right? Getting students to think more deeply, which is a problem we often have, right? I don't want to replace human feedback, but as a complement, because when students get feedback from me, they get one type of feedback. But now I could say, I want you to have feedback of a different type from a different source than me. I want feedback that will challenge you or feedback that will reaffirm you, right? And even here I've asked, give students inaccurate information and feedback that looks like a compliment but really is not. And students have to wade through that. So I've set up something that will help them, right? Could I make the design more accessible? Could I make my experiment more focused? And what could go wrong with this experiment? Are there counter arguments to my thesis? Are there different analogies I could use? So these are good things to use AI for. AI is actually really good at this. But it also means as teachers, we're going to think a lot less about just the product, and we have to think more about the process because we're trying to create experts. All right, one last thing, and because there are some other creative assignments that we could do. So for example, right, there are some things that I can't do without AI. So for example, if I teach medieval history, I could say, I want you to create a medieval photograph. You can't go to the library. There aren't any, right? You can't cheat. You have to create one with AI or teach an AI how to paint like this painter, right? That I can only do with an AI. Or create a video of this chemical equation and tell me how the bonds are broken and reformed. So these are new types of assignments that I could do with AI that I couldn't do without AI. And so again, I talked a lot about feedback, stress testing a business plan, right? Here's the prompt that I give students, right? You have a business plan before you hand it in. But the truth is, I could just say, talk to Mark Cuban, right? And I set up a bot and have students do that. All right, let me pause for some questions. And I have another example or two if you need that, but let me make sure that I'm answering the questions if there are some.
I was wondering, see, what my basic understanding is that AI is generating its own idea based upon what humans have already feeded it. But if I want to, like, for example, I interview some people and I want to look for some newer ideas, newer themes, can I prompt AI and feed AI with those interviews to look for any new concept, to look for any new themes in a particular set of people, to know their perspective and to get a better idea of generating some themes and codes out of it?
100%, absolutely. So think about, it's a mistake to think that, well, AI only knows what it's learned because AI doesn't know anything. It's literally a thinking machine, right? It's a set of weights. And so if you give it, so Notebook LM that I use, but again, you could just use ChatGPT. It's actually really good at analysis, which is why it's good at financial analysis. So here are the interviews I did. So think about this. I have tenure coming up. I have 10 years of student feedback. I want to know patterns, right? I want to know, what did the students like about my teaching? What did they hate about my teaching, right? It loves narrative. So if you give it tens of thousands of hours of narrative, AI is really good at finding the patterns, doing a summary. That it's very good at.
Can you please tell me any particular very good tool which is available for specially teachers for the same task, other than
So there are two things. So for most Claude, ChatGPT, and Gemini will all allow you to upload lots of files. But Notebook does the same thing, but again, the Notebook metaphor is useful. It allows you to put up to 50 PDFs into one notebook more, if 10 times that much if you pay. But there's also, I've put in the chat, Boodlebox is another one that I like. Poe is a consolidator, because I didn't get to talk about custom bots. So I've given you the link to a bunch of custom bots. The first ones are mine. But I even have a bot to help you make bots. So one of the things that I do is instead of giving students, I said I could customize assignments. I can also make a support bot. So when I give you an assignment, I can give you a bot. I give the assignment to the bot and I say, don't give students the answer. Help them get unstuck. And so they have a specialized tool that they use to do the assignment, right? And I give them a link like I've just dropped for you. But I can also create an assignment that is itself a custom bot. So if you click on one of those bots, you'll see there's a bot that will teach you organic chemistry, chemical bonds. But there's another bot that's a simulation for be the US president and try to make the economy better. I can also see on the back end everything students did. And I can also ask the bot to grade when the student got to a certain level of mastery.
Thank you
Other
so much.
questions?
Yeah, thank you so much.
I think we have a question from Eddie, who's to ask if there's a continual need to rewrite assignments, assessments, and assessment rubrics just to keep up with AI.
Yeah. So I think the answer sadly is yes, because it is changing very rapidly. I update my website every couple of days because certainly the last 6 weeks have seen rapid advancement in what AI can do. So I do think that custom bots are the best way to stay ahead of this because now I can give students an assignment that actually is a bot. In other words, I want you to work through this problem. And again, you should try the bots on that page. And one of my bots will help you create bots. What are the learning outcomes I want the student to do? And then, oh, okay, I want you to talk to Einstein or to Socrates. I want you to learn this. I can give them. And so I find students are more willing to work with a bot, and it's harder to cheat because I've asked them to, right? The bot won't give them the answer. They have to use my bot. They can't just go to ChatGPT. It is true that if a really clever student could have ChatGPT talk to my bot, there's always a way to cheat. But they're more motivated to do that. And so I think that modules that are custom bot modules are going to be the future. There is no fail-safe way to check student assignments to make sure that they did the work themselves. There is not. There is Turnitin, which is pretty good, but it still gives lots of false positives, and there are lots of ways to beat it. So I do not think we are going to get, because AI, right, the student usage is enormous, and so they could watermark them so we could tell, but they have a financial incentive, ChatGPT does, not to do that.
So it's interesting when you mentioned that we now have to teach students how to be experts. The question I think we're going to have to face is experts for whom? For what industries? So if you're teaching an esoteric academic subject, an expert in that area will still not be able to find a job. So what do you think of this, the definition of experts moving forward?
Yeah, no, exactly. You expert in what does matter. And so on the other hand, the reason that all of us became experts, right, and is we're experts in two things. One is we have a content knowledge, but the other is we also have a critical thinking ability. So yes, it does matter what your content expertise is. Your company has to think, oh, okay, you can evaluate this. And so medieval history will probably be less useful to a company than evaluating business plans. But on the other hand, the ability to ask better questions, to evaluate those answers, to think critically, I do think is a generalized skill. It is a kind of expertise, but you're quite right. On the other hand, I'm not sure that medieval history was ever something that businesses wanted. So, as a content area. And so I think that hasn't changed as much, but you're quite right. And frankly, this is the big problem that we are facing. I think that the question that we will now face over the next few years is, how do we change our pedagogy? How do we stay ahead of this? It's utterly exhausting. There's so much going on, which is why I suggest that you get started by just using this in your daily life. Talk to your students about how they are using it, because they are going to use it. You will not be able to hold back the flood water. It's like the internet. It's not going away. And so the question is, where do I use it and where do I continue to need human skills? And that's going to be discipline specific and something that we all need to think about pretty carefully.
I think we have a question from Melissa as well. I think she's saying that students these days use AI for even the smallest assignments, does this not hamper their intellectual ability or thinking power?
It
How do
probably
you-
does, which is why we need to rethink our assignments so that they're either right, they're less motivated. We either have to explain why, right? When you go to the gym, you know that if you don't do the push-ups, you don't get the benefit, that there has to be some discomfort. And so we have to talk to students about the value of that discomfort, the same way that my gym teacher talks to me about the value of the pain in doing one more push-up. So part of that's a motivational challenge. But the other part is, do I still need to teach long division? Because if I'm teaching something that students perceive as not necessary or relevant, they are much more likely to cheat. So sometimes that's just explaining the motivation, but sometimes it's I do need to change the assignment and think, is there another way to learn this? Is there something else that they need to learn? Is there another kind of assignment I can give them? But yes, students are short-circuiting themselves. And our job is going to be, how do I convince them not to do that? Because at the moment, the AI tools are better than anything we can use to stop it. There really isn't a way to stop the cheating, especially if you're online. Again, try Googling those AI extensions that are answer extensions that sit inside the browser, and you will be surprised.
Well, I think we do have another question from Rachel in the chat. And Rachel is in academic planning for postgraduate students for AI literacy. And so how does a program in AI literacy remain relevant in terms of curriculum apart from adaptive learning systems?
So I do think that some of the tools will change in the ability for AI to do things, but I think certainly for students in AI literacy, it's a rapidly moving field. I don't, it's hard to anticipate what AI will be able to do. Remain flexible and continue to update the curriculum. I also think that AI literacy is not going to be as much about prompt engineering as we thought. It is going to be about flexibility, about curiosity. Again, I would argue that my prompt page, the page of my prompts, is useful because I'm a creative thinker, because I'm an arts person. And so I have lots of creative ideas for how I could get AI to do stuff. I still think that matters.
Now I get a little bit worried because I try to recall when I was a student, when the introduction to the calculator, and then we start talking about, hey, you're not going to learn how to do a computation anymore, but you actually mentioned that we teach them a foundation, but we do not need to teach them a long multiplication and so on, because they will be using a spreadsheet or even calculator. Now, do you think that the introduction of this AI currently, and with the accelerated progression in the AI, in the future, the teaching in the university will be completely different, and maybe the effect will be even surpass what the introduction of the calculator will be?
Yes, I know. I think this is going to be a much more fundamental shift. Again, let's go back to what I said at the very beginning about the map and GPS, right? This is a cognitive technology or manual transmission in your car, right? This is a cognitive technology that I do think is going to change human thinking. And I think it's not clear if it's going to make us, it will make us more creative, but it may make us less creative in a different sense because of our own ability to do. So I think we have to be very mindful of what we want students to do, both in terms of what will get them jobs, but also in terms of development, right? Because if we're trying to create lifelong learners, people who can learn new things, it's again, like the fitness, there are certain muscles in your brain that you have to use. You have to be uncomfortable. You have to try different things. You have to not accept the first answer. You have to be skeptical. But those skills have become more important. But the way that we teach them is probably going to change. Right. So again, I suggest the bot that I put in my presidential, you're the president, fix the economy bot. Instead of giving a macroeconomics lecture, I now give the students the bot and I say, you be the president. And then I give them 10 minutes and then it gives them an evaluation of how they did for 4 years. And then I say, so what did you learn? What do you now need to know to do better the next time? Right. It's a game for them. So it's more motivating. They don't cheat, but takes away some lecture time, because the fact is they don't need as much lecture, because now they want to go learn on themselves to be a better whatever. So this is, I think, the fundamental challenge, is that I think this is going to be a bigger change for our teaching than the internet ever was, or the calculator or anything else, because it will fundamentally change human thinking.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So I think we have time for one more. Olivia asked a question about privacy. So remember, so an AI bot, so AI doesn't know anything. So, and if you use, like when I uploaded my book, well, I wrote the book in Microsoft Word, right? Or if you write it in Google, it's already part of the training data. So we have, not that should give them a pass, but we have other privacy issues, right? Everything you say in your car belongs to your car company. All of that's used in the training data, right? So if you write on your computer and you store things in the cloud, your photos, your dissertation, it's already in the training data. But the other thing about AI that's important to remember is that I can't get something out. So if I upload a book, or even if I try this, here's an assignment for students. I want you to reproduce the first chapter, the first paragraph of this famous book, or maybe a not so famous book, and say, and then, so AI will give you a reasonable facsimile, but it can't actually produce exactly Shakespeare, right? So there'll be mistakes. And so your question then to students is, well, what are the mistakes? What else could you tell it to get the answer better? Do some literary analysis. It can't actually reproduce it because it doesn't have a knowledge base. It's processing and thinking. So it can search the internet, but it doesn't search the cloud that Microsoft has kept private for you, hopefully. Anyway, so I do use an alias for students. I have students give me an alias that I can use. But now there are lots of tools that are, in the US, it's FERPA compliance, right? There's government regulations for what student data you can use. But there's a number of companies that do this, and all of my corporate clients are now doing this. So they now have a third party that keeps their data, right? So AT&T has Ask AT&T, which is a ChatGPT model that runs inside the company. So they pay a lot for this, and they can now have all of their data. So it talks to all of their data. This is called RAG, right? And so one of the ways to make AI much better is to give it a data set, but then you have to make sure that your privacy. And so universities and institutions probably have to do that.